and I want to bring you a presentation today on how to save up to 25% on your dog food bill, have less shedding, visit the vet less, and deal with less poop and have a healthier dog. A lot of promises there in one little thing. So buckle up. I recommend that if you get a chance, if you even need to pause the video, take some notes and see what may apply to your dog and your situation. Okay, so I remember one day at the beginning of my training career, I was working with a client whose dog smelled really bad. I mean, dog smelled, the house smelled, etc. The dog had various diseases and allergies and all sorts of stuff going on. The veterinarian had them on a whole variety of steroids and medications and special shampoos for the coat and all this stuff for the allergies and who knows what else. But the dog, he wasn't thriving. You know, no matter how much medication they gave him, no matter how many special shampoos, how many steroids, how many antibiotics, he still had problems from head to tail. It so happened that I had recently become a distributor for a dog food that I really liked. And for those who want to feed kibble, I still think it's one of the best out there. You can get it shipped to you at tysdogfood.com. It comes shipped. And that's not the purpose of today's presentation. I did want to throw it out there. We are a distributor, just to let you know what kind of kibble we recommend. But that's not the purpose of today's presentation, me trying to sell you something. What I wanted to do was really get into a different way of feeding that makes some big things happen. So, in any case, this dog was eating a very popular brand of food recommended by their vet. I won't mention the brand by name. I'll just simply tell you that it rhymes with Smyant Smyat. Maybe you'll recognize the food. I told them they ought to try a different food and recommended the one that I had previously mentioned, and telling them that it could very well help their dog. So they gave it a try. And I remember coming back a few weeks later to do our next training session. When I went into the kitchen, I saw a huge mess on the floor. There was dog food spread all over the place. I asked them what had happened. I was pretty confused. They had a clean house. They relayed to me that they had decided to switch to the food that I'd recommended. And they decided to switch slowly, though. So they were mixing the two brands together, the Schmyant and the stuff that I recommended earlier. The problem, though, was that when presented with both options, their dog only liked the new food. So it would literally pick through the dish, spit and kick aside the old food, and eat the new food, and that's it. The result was just this giant mess in the kitchen. But the bigger result came later, once the dog got completely switched over to the new food. A lot of things happened. The dog stopped smelling so bad. Basically the dog odor in their house went away. The dog stopped shedding so much. He was a major shedder, and just fur everywhere, and his shedding went down by a ton. He stopped pooping 4 to 6 times a day. I don't know if your dog poops 4 to 6 times a day, but that's not normal. It is normal on these big name food brands, but it's not normal for what a dog should be doing. And his medical conditions cleared up. He got off of every piece of medicine, the steroids, the antibiotics, the creams, the antifungals, all the stuff that the dog was taking. He got off every last one of them. This was the first time in my career that I started putting together the benefits of a great diet with the overall health of the dog, including coat, bowel movements, medical conditions, and more. I know that sounds stupid. I think, a lot of us, look at that and think, well, duh, dog food or the diet has to do with a lot of things. A lot of us think that way, but I don't know that I was thinking that way, way back then. At least not up until that point, I hadn't been thinking about the relation between behavior and food and all that good stuff. I had assumed that most vets knew what they were talking about when it came to dog food. It never occurred to me that what I learned later, that most vets are taught from textbooks that are sponsored and written by the dog food companies. It never occurred to me that vets don't really get much education at all on their dog food during their schooling. I love vets, so don't get me wrong, but when I started doing the research, I found that the food that most of them recommended was awful. And I'm not talking like, oh, there's definitely better food out there. I'm talking like actually detrimental to the dog's health that cause allergies, that cause cancer, that cause, all sorts of problems. Gastrointestinal problems, skin conditions, even behavior problems. And that's something I had never thought of before. But have you ever done that in your own life? Have you ever eaten clean? I don't know, maybe you always eat clean, but have you ever been eating lousy and suddenly you start eating clean and you sleep better, you feel better, you act nicer, all sorts of things happen. Again, I don't know why it never occurred to me to look into the diet aspect of our dog's behavior, but at that point I started changing. From that time on, I started recommending this food, and I started seeing dogs everywhere improve. I can tell you story after story of dogs getting a better coat. I can tell you story after dogs getting better stools, less poop, less shedding, things like that. And I saw countless dogs get off medications and expensive treatments when all they really needed was solid nutrition. So it was a huge eye-opener for me, just, what's going on in the pet food industry. Now, I still recommend this food. I think it's great. Don't get me wrong. But again, I'm not trying to sell you this food. I really want to sell you on something else, and nothing that you'll pay me for. But a few years back, I started wondering if there was a better way to feed. So I started looking at different types of diets that are out there. And I came across one diet time and time and time again. It was obscure at the time, and for the most part, it still is fairly obscure. It's not a lot of people do it. Not a lot of people have even heard of it. What I'm referring to is a raw diet. Yes, I'm talking about feeding your dog raw meat, raw bones, raw eggs, raw fish, raw liver, raw heart, raw plenty of stuff. A raw diet, completely raw. I was super skeptical at first. I was thinking, but won't the dog get sick from salmonella or some sort of bacteria? That's what I had going on in my mind. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Or won't the bone splinter in his throat and choke him? It seemed like that was the first thing that I had learned, when I was a dog owner as a teenager. Is, oh, don't give a dog bones, it'll splinter. I'm going to talk about that later as well. But I started feeding raw. I did a lot of research, figured out how to do it, and I started feeding it, just, on faith. It took a bit of getting used to for both the dogs and me. I'm talking about feeding it to my own dogs, not to my clients' dogs at this point. But after getting our rhythm, I feel like it's been the best thing we could have ever done for our dog's health. There's a lot of argument these days about the origins of dogs. Some say that they are ancestors of wolves. Actually, I got that wrong. Some say that wolves are their ancestors. Sorry, wrote that down wrong. Others say that they aren't. Some claim a close relation, others don't. There's lots of different, thought processes here. Where and how our current pet dogs evolved, I can't tell you. But what I can tell you is that our dogs have a digestive tract that is very similar to the wolf. So whether or not they're closely related, I can tell you that their digestive systems are pretty darn close in how they behave and how they respond to food and different nutrients. So go grab a bag of most dog foods. What are you going to see? In many of them, you're going to see corn. Do wolves eat corn? You'll see soy. Do wolves eat soy? You'll see all sorts of ingredients that are foreign to anything that a canid should be eating. It's crazy. Wolves don't eat corn. They don't eat soy. They don't eat beet pulp. They don't eat stuff like that. Are wolves cooking their food? Or are they eating everything raw, including meat, bones, fur, heads, tails, feathers, beaks, claws, all sorts of stuff? Are they eating it all? Or are they cooking it? Of course we know the answer to that. They're not cooking it. Now I know dogs aren't wolves. I already made that disclaimer, but I think I have to make it again because I know some people at this point are going to be listening to this and saying, well, no, it doesn't count. Dogs aren't wolves. Yes, dogs have been domesticated. Their needs have evolved. And on certain levels, their digestive tracts have evolved. And, certain things have evolved over the years. I won't argue with any of that. But I will tell you, though, that there's a difference between evolution and adaptation. Our domestic pets have simply adapted to the foods that we give them. That doesn't mean that that food is appropriate for them. I mean, think about it. Plenty of people live relatively healthy lives while drinking tons of soda and eating fast food all the time. We know that's awful for them. We know it's not healthy. But they've adapted to it, and they can lead, some people can lead relatively healthy lives eating that kind of junk, even though it's not even a question that, soda and fast food is not healthy for us. Some people can eat fast food every day of their life and be basically okay. Some can do the same and get deathly ill. I remember way back when I first switched to this other dog food, I was talking with another client and recommending, because their dog was in a similar position. I was like, you might want to look at the different dog food. And their response was like, oh, our last dog, we fed him Ol Roy, or, I don't remember, it was Ol Roy or some other just really awful brand. And he lived to be 14 years old. And you'll hear stories of that all the time. But to stuff like that, I'll often mention, well, hey, do you guys remember George Burns? He was that comedian that smoked tons of cigars and I think even cigarettes, and didn't live a healthy lifestyle, but still lived to be, I don't know, was it 100 or something like that? And so just because one dog can eat junk and live to be 14, that doesn't discount the 50 dogs for every one dog you find. The 50 dogs that eat junk and get cancer early, get bone problems early, get other problems early, and end up dying prematurely. Regardless of the individual body's reaction to daily fast food, it doesn't change the fact that a human body should not be eating fast food on a daily basis. Same is true for dogs. Some can eat lousy kibble day in and day out and live a long and relatively healthy life. Others will get deathly ill from their kibble. And I'm not even just talking about, the recalls. If those of you are familiar with recalls, it seems like every other week there's another dog food recall because some poison entered into the system somehow. I'm not even referring to that. I'm referring to dog food made to their specifications that makes dog deathly ill and kills dogs prematurely. Neither of these cases changes the fact that eating a lousy kibble is just a bad choice for a dog. So it's based on this idea of feeding a more primal, a more natural diet that more and more dog owners are moving towards a raw diet for their dog. The bottom line is that a dog's digestive system is not designed to be eating cooked meats, grains, and vegetables. Now, if kibble is what it has to be, a dog will adapt, and there are better kibbles than others. I mentioned one at the beginning of this presentation, and I recommend you do research and find others that are good. Don't just take my word for it. But the fact remains that a dog is designed to be eating raw meat, bone, tendon, marrow, and all that good stuff. Before I get more into the raw diet, let me tell you about a few ingredients in most dog foods. They're pretty prevalent and pretty common in a lot of dog foods. So even if you don't finish this presentation today wanting to feed a raw diet, I at least want you to convince you to upgrade your current food if you're feeding a low-quality food. Let me educate you on a few different ingredients found in a lot of different dog foods. Number one is corn. This is a major allergen. It causes a lot of skin problems, swelling, itchiness of the feet and the rear end. Do you have a dog that chews on its feet or chews on its rear end all the time? This can often be related to corn because corn can make the extremities swell, or the dog can just have an outright allergy to corn. Dogs cannot digest corn. There's absolutely nothing of value in putting corn. The value in putting corn into dog food is that it's fairly cheap. It's subsidized by the government, at least here in the United States. And so it's super cheap to put into the dog food and just make it as filler. But it's awful. The second one is soy. A lot of folks think that soy is the number one allergen in dogs, meaning the number one thing that causes them to develop allergies. But it's in a lot of dog foods and it's awful. Number three is beet pulp. This is basically sugar. It's addictive. It makes the dog's body acidic, and it's awful for the metabolism. This beet pulp is this very cheap, and oftentimes there's a lot of just the cellulose, often just all this stuff in there that just has no value, and it's just this sugary mash that gets put in there. And they do it for the same reason that they put sugar in everything designed for kids and adults. And there's sugar in your salad dressing, for crying out loud. It just makes it sweet, and it's a filler, and it's cheap, and it makes the dog want to eat the food. But there's no value to it, and it's just bad for your dog. Cellulose. This is literally the equivalent to sawdust. This is like leftover plant material. There's no value in it. It's just pure filler. Number 5 is rice hulls. Rice hulls. These are the outside discarded shells of rice. They are nutritionally pointless. They're, again, simply there as filler. And if it was just filler, that's one thing. But a lot of these things, like I say, cause allergies. They cause other problems. They cause skin issues, rashes, all sorts of problems. All right, number 6, byproducts. Now, typically these are left over. So when you see byproducts in your dog's food, it could mean a couple of things. There are some dog food companies that use only human-grade ingredients, and so the byproducts in there are a little bit different. But unless they specify that they use human-grade ingredients, typically what byproducts are leftover waste from human products. And they tend to include what we call the 4 Ds: dead, dying, diseased, or disabled. And so some people might be saying, well, of course they should be dead. You know, it should be dead before it goes into dog food. What I'm referring to are these huge stockyards that, where thousands and thousands and thousands of animals come through them, where we're talking sheep, cattle, pigs, what have you. And when you have, tens and hundreds of thousands of animals moving through these stockyards at any given point, you're gonna have these animals that just die. They die from old age, they die from disease, or they die from something, and so they aren't fit for human consumption. So we're not talking that they're dead because they were butchered or slaughtered. We're talking they're dead because they died. And so, like I say, for human consumption, those animals are not allowed to go into the food by law, but they can go into the dog food. So when I say dead, that's what I mean. Or, of course, dying. An animal that's sickly can go into these things. Diseased or disabled. Sometimes we're even talking dogs and cats. A lot of these, there's some major shelters in the United States that euthanize an enormous amount of animals, and they sell them to the dog food companies because the dog food companies will render them and put them into the food. And number one, that's pretty gross, but number 2, it's not like they filtered out the poison that they put into the dog's body to kill the animal, to euthanize the animal. And so anyways, when you see these byproducts can mean a lot of things. It could just mean some, feathers or some bones or something like that, or it could mean one of the 4 Ds. 7, animal fat. This is often restaurant grease and other commercial fats. So there are companies that go around and they buy leftover grease from the fryer from McDonald's and Arby's and stuff like that. They do some rendering process and then they sell it to dog food companies. Now, why would they do this? They do it because when you put beet pulp and corn and soy and byproduct, when you put all this junk together, it's not appetizing. Dogs don't want to eat it. And so they have to spray this animal fat grease on the outside of the food in order to make it more doable so the dogs want to eat it. And so look at some of the lower quality foods, that are out there. If you handle them, like physically pick up the kernels of food or whatnot, it's disgusting. They're oily, they're greasy, they're disgusting. And so that's often what it is just this fat that, was cooking up somebody's fries yesterday and today is being sprayed on the outside of dog food so that they'll actually eat the junk. Am I making you sick yet? Meat meal. When you see meat meal on your dog food bag, oftentimes that is one of the 4 Ds: dead, dying, diseased, or what was the other one? Anyways, that's often one of the 4 Ds. Number 9, BHA, BHT, propyl gallate, ethoxyquin, sodium nitrate. These are chemical preservatives. Some of these batches of dog foods are made and, they might not get to market for months and months and months. And so they put these heavy chemical preservatives in there to store them so that they stay preserved while they're in their bag. They dry the food out, which isn't good. Dogs need moisture in their food. So that's not a good thing. But these preservatives are often linked with various cancers, kidney diseases, and other bad things. This is not an exhaustive list. This list can go on and on and on, of things that go into dog food that just are awful. It's surprising how well dogs do, eating this kind of stuff. There are plenty of awful ingredients that make their way into a lot of dog foods. And so let me tell you something else that will have you hopefully think further about a raw diet versus a kibble diet. Let's compare the diet of our current pets in the form of kibble to an ancestral diet, what dogs and canines used to eat, and still do, dogs in the wild and canines in the wild. Protein. This is one that frustrates me. I so frequently hear that large puppies need low protein diets so they don't grow too fast. This just isn't the case. Ancestral dogs of all sizes ate very high protein diets. In fact, ancestral diets typically consisted of roughly 56% protein. Compare that to today's kibble, 18 to 32%. Dogs need more protein than what they're getting, not less protein. Fat. This is another one that has become a major problem. So many dog food companies have followed the erroneous low-fat craze. It's obviously started with people, and nowadays I even see research, and there's a lot of understanding now that a low-fat diet in people isn't necessarily a good thing either. That we need these fats. Obviously too much fat, too much anything, too much protein, too much sugar, too much anything is bad. But low fat is not the way to go. But unfortunately, we've been led to believe that if you have less fat in your food, that it also means that you'll lose weight and you'll be healthier. And that's not necessarily going to be the case. Dogs shouldn't be on a low-fat diet. Today's kibble has about 8 to 22% fat, whereas ancestral diets had more like 25 to 30%. So 2 or sometimes even 3 times as much. Carbohydrates. Dogs aren't built needing a lot of carbohydrates. The problem is that carbohydrates can be so much cheaper than proteins that dog food companies load up their food with carbs. The typical kibble is going to run 46 to 74% carbs. This is not awesome, guys. The ancestral diet had more like 14% carbs. In addition, the act of cooking or extrusion greatly decreases the nutritional value of any dog food. A dog system is designed for uncooked food. Now, usually when I explain this to people, it's easy to understand. Most people at this point are like, okay, I get it. Kibble may not be the best choice, but how do I do this? How do I feed raw? That's what I want to take the rest of the time talking about. I want to talk about how and hopefully answer some of the frequently asked questions that I get. All right, let's talk about composition and amount first. And so, as a general rule of thumb, I like to feed a ratio of about 80-10-10. And so what that means is 80% flesh, 10% organs, 10% bones. And as another general rule of thumb, I like to feed 2 to 3% of the dog's body weight per day. That's just a rule of thumb. But in a case like that, a 50-pound dog would eat about 1 to 1.5 pounds of food per day, as an example. Those are just rules of thumb. Every dog is different. Every dog needs different things, which is another reason I don't like kibble. It's one size fits all. But yeah, so these are just rules of thumb. For example, I've recently noticed my own dog, he's a Rottweiler, he's getting a little bit skinny on 2% a day, so I simply upped his intake just a bit, and over the last couple weeks, he's put on a couple pounds, and he's back to looking just fine. The question I get all the time is, aren't bones bad for dogs? Won't they splinter in their digestive system or splinter in their throat and choke them? It's possible. It's also possible for dogs to choke on kibble, so it's possible for dogs to choke on bones, but that's not necessarily a negative because dog can eat fast and choke on anything. Where most dogs will choke on a bone is a cooked bone, and so that's an important thing, distinction to make. Cooked chicken, beef, pork bones, for example, are very much more likely to splinter, and so it can happen with a raw bone. Raw bones can splinter. It's very, very unlikely. My personal dogs have been eating raw chicken bones for years now. The bones are soft, they're easily digestible, and have a lot of nutrients. They've also eaten beef bones, pork, duck. The list goes on and on and on. As a treat, they'll sometimes get bigger, meatier bones to work on, but bones have been just fine. Like I said, they've had pork, fish, chicken, beef, all with no issues. In addition, I fed them things like duck heads, where not only are they eating a skull, but they're also downing beaks and feathers. Again, no problem with any of that. The next question I always hear is, what about salmonella and other bacteria? And so salmonella and bacteria are found on raw chicken and poultry, and bacteria is on raw meat, but these things are also on the floor, and they're on your sink, and they're all over your house. Salmonella is often found in people's bedspreads, for crying out loud. Your dog system is designed to deal with this. Your dog was built for this. Again, if they're out in the wild, they're not going to cook their food, and they're not going to eat one meal and suddenly die. Now, don't get me wrong. I need to add a disclaimer here. Any food can contain a bacteria or impurity that can make your dog sick. I don't want you to think it's impossible for a dog to get sick from raw feeding. But my experience has seen that many dogs get sick from impurities in kibble. I know of only one person that once had an issue from their dog getting sick from raw feeding. So, it can happen. But again, your dog can get sick from eating anything. Just like you. You could develop an allergy to anything or get sick from, one bad piece of meat or something like that. Again, I welcome you to do more research outside of what I'm telling you. Don't just take my word for it. But I can tell you from experience that dogs fed on raw are much healthier. So the next questions often are, well, how can I do this? And how am I actually going to save money with this? Like I said earlier, you generally want to look for an 80-10-10 ratio. If you can feed a whole carcass, this is a good way to do it, as the ratio the body naturally has is pretty good. Well, obviously, because that's what dogs eat in the wild. So if you have access to chicken carcass, rabbit carcass, or other small animal carcass, that can be a really great way to feed. If you don't, I usually don't, although I'm planning to start raising rabbits shortly just for this purpose, then you'll need to kind of piece together that 80-10-10 ratio. So here are some ideas. I'll often get chicken drumsticks from Costco or the grocery store. It's not uncommon for me to find them at 80 cents to $1.29 a pound. The drumsticks often form a foundation for what I feed. They are meaty but also contain bone. I'll get duck heads from an Asian market. I'll get espinaca. That's from Latino markets. It's a cut of meat that's from a pig that's from the vertebrae. There's a lot of meat and really great bone. And so I go to the Latino market butchers and ask for espinaca. I'll get fish heads from someone who went fishing, or sometimes just go over to Asian or Latino markets where you can buy fish heads. I'll get whole fish from just about anywhere. So if you ever see whole fish on for, good price, grab some. There are a few local butchers that I'll stop by that sell raw meaty bones to dog people for $1 a pound or so. So a lot of butchers, now I know there aren't as many butchers these days, but if you have butcher shops in your area, a lot of them are starting to realize that dog owners want this stuff, and so they're starting to sell it. And it's just, a lot of the times it's waste for them, so they'll sell it cheap. Some butchers even give it away. Our local agricultural store carries meaty bones in a freezer for dogs, and so here in Utah, that's IFA. There's some around the country as well. But in most communities, even a lot of like city communities, there's feed stores or agricultural stores. And so oftentimes they'll carry these meaty bones. I'll get my organ meat typically from Latino or Asian markets. I can usually find liver for $1 a pound, and sometimes can even get heart or brain. These are good things, very good things. Am I disgusting you yet, though? I wonder how much more you can take of me talking about this. I'll get tripe and stomach from Latino markets, and this is great stuff. And so, these insides of the dog are really great. If you can find green tripe, that's like the holy grail of feeding raw. That stuff is so good for dogs. Smells like death, but very good. I'll get chicken feet, great source of glucosamine from Latino or Asian markets for about $1 a pound. I'll get raw eggs, from just anywhere, your grocery store or any place where they might be, feeding. I see them all over the side of the road. People are like, hey, come buy organic eggs from us. You see a lot more of that these days. Walmart frequently sells chicken gizzards and hearts for about $1.29 a pound. So very cheap. We've got a local place here to us that processes hunter's deer meat, and we'll get it for just over $1 a pound in addition to some nice bones. And so, like I say, in our area, and this is the case in a lot of areas around the country, hunters go hunting and they need a place, unless they're going to process it themselves, they'll drop it off somewhere. Now, here in Utah at least, and probably the case in a lot of different places, it's the law that it gets processed. You can't just kill a deer and just leave it or let it rot or whatever. You have to get it processed. A lot of hunters don't feel like doing that. They're just in it for the sport anyway, so they'll drop it off. And some never come back and pick it up. And so what happens is we've got several kind of local butcher places here where hunters do this. They drop off the meat, and they basically got it for free, and so they'll sell it for really cheap, and it's awesome. I mean, we're talking organic deer meat and bones and elk and other stuff that that folks hunt. I'm not a hunter, so I can't speak too smart about that right now. But anyways, great shops. Butcher shops seem to be less and less common these days, but if I'm in the neighborhood, I drive by and will sometimes get scraps for free, and other times just see what cuts they have cheap or what specials they may have for dog owners. You see a lot of the less desirable cuts for us Americans, and I don't know where you're watching this. You might not be in America. But a lot of the less desirable cuts are things with bones, sinew, gristle, etc. But that's stuff that's great for our dogs. Now, I've lived outside of America, and I've done this as well. We lived in Costa Rica, and we would get fish heads, and we would get entrails. I'm trying to remember what they were called, but it had a lot of chicken feet and organs and stuff like that. And so, and they were the less desirable cuts in Costa Rica as well. So we were able to get them super cheap. I've never fed so cheap as I did when we lived in Costa Rica. It often makes for cheaper cuts because they're less desirable, like I mentioned, and that's where I get my stuff. I have friends, clients, and no other dog owners who get their food from other places, including hunting. If you hunt, this is awesome. We've got some clients that they're nice enough to bring us elk steaks or antelope roasts or something like that, for the dogs and things like that, or sometimes even for us. But if you hunt, this can be a great way to get the protein for very cheap. Fishing, of course, if you can get fish, there's, the omega acids and the different, the fatty acids that come from fish are so healthy for a dog, so healthy for their coat. Feeding fish is awesome. A lot of folks will raise their own chickens, rabbits, sheep, goats, and they know the meat is quality, it's organic, they know it's healthy, and that's how they feed. Going by processing plants to buy in bulk or even get free leftovers. So I know folks that will do this, that they live near a processing plant that is processing things for humans. And like I say, there's going to be waste. There's going to be scraps of fat. There's going to be bones that they can't do anything with. And so they'll either buy them or get them for free. You can get really intricate with this. I know a lot of folks who do. And so I hope that doesn't scare you off, because I keep it simple. Our staples are organs from the Latino market, eggs, and different cuts of chicken I pick up at the grocery store. So that's most of what I do. Like I say, if I'm around a butcher, if I've got a friend who went fishing, if we've got a client who went hunting, I'll supplement, and that's just fine. But, the core of what I do is not that difficult to do. It's just heading to the grocery store. I might do an extra trip to like a Latino market or an Asian market, but that's about all I have to do. So how does this save you money? All right, let's do some math here. Here's what I found. I used to feed my dogs the kibble I recommend. Like I say, TysDogFood.com. I would go through about 70 pounds of food per month with my dogs. The food is roughly $2 a pound, so I was spending about $140 a month on food. So that's just one food, but that's actually kind of on the low end so the food that I feed is fairly cheap for kibble, at least per serving cost. What I mean by that is you can find cheaper kibble. So that's 40 pounds. 40 pounds cost me about $80 or something like that. And so you can find 40 pounds for $40, but it's such garbage that you have to feed so much more of it. And so if you're feeding kibble, if you're $1 a pound, $2 a pound, $3 a pound, it really isn't going to matter very much, because you're either going to feed more or less depending on the quality of the food. And so in any case, if I was feeding $1 a pound food, I'd probably be feeding like 140 pounds of it. If I was feeding $3 a pound food, I'd probably be feeding, 50, 60 pounds of it. And so any which way you go, like I say, you're going to find that the ratio stays about the same. So for my dogs, I was about $140 a month for food. My two dogs collectively weigh about 140 pounds, which translates to just under 3 pounds of food a day at 2% of their body weight. So again, now I'm talking about raw. When I'm feeding raw, that's what we're talking about. To make the numbers even, let's say 3 pounds, as sometimes they need a little bit more than 2%. So on a raw diet, I'm feeding 3 pounds of food a day. 3 pounds of food a day makes for about 90 pounds of food total. So if you'll remember the math, I was feeding probably 70 pounds of kibble, and I'm feeding 90 pounds of raw. And the reason why is raw food is not dehydrated, or baked, cooked, extruded, any of that. And so what happens is, there's more water in there, so there's more moisture. So that definitely affects our ratios here, but that's a good thing, in my opinion. But yeah, so that's why I'm feeding 90 pounds of raw versus 60, 70 pounds of kibble. But my food, however, ranges from free to about $1.29 a pound. So yes, there's a little bit more effort involved, and I'm not factoring that in, so don't give me a hard time for that, but there's not much more effort involved. But at these rates, I typically will spend about $100 or less on their food per month. So over the course of a year, that adds up to about $500 in savings for my two dogs, which, that's awesome. But the savings don't end there. So when you combine that with not needing to brush their teeth, this is cool. I didn't even mention this in the beginning, but we don't have to brush our dog's teeth. They're, how old are they? They're 12 and a half and 10 and a half. So my dogs are older, and their teeth look great for their age. They're worn from years and years and years and years of eating food, but, they're clean. You don't have to brush them. Less dog odor, poop that hardly needs to be picked up. So we clean up our yard, but like if you miss some poop, it doesn't matter because it like disintegrates into this white mess, and so even if you'll have a lot less poop feeding this way, and the poop is just this tiny little waste. Way less shedding. Our dogs never have to go to the vet. Now, I attribute that to this diet. Now, some skeptic might say, well, maybe you just have healthy dogs and they don't have to go to the vet. I don't know, maybe. But it has been years since I've had to take them to a vet for anything other than a shot. And here I've got this 10-and-a-half-year-old Rottweiler, which if you meet most 10-and-a-half-year-old Rottweilers, they're out at, they're on death's doorstep if they've made it that long. My other dog is 12 and a half, and she acts like a puppy. And so we don't have to go to the vet. I'm sure at some point that's going to change. My dogs are going to get older and older. But literally, it's probably been 10 years since I've had to go to the vet. That's huge savings right there. I'm in love with this kind of feeding. Caution, you do need to do a better job at cleaning with this diet. Your dog's system is prepped for these bacteria, but yours isn't. You don't want to cross-contaminate, so be careful. So that bowl that had raw chicken, that's got to be washed better than the bowl that had kibble, for example. So do you want to try the diet? Some people are afraid at first. I get that. Heck, some dogs are weirded out at first as well. My dog was, I'd give him a drumstick, and my Rottweiler, if you know him, boy, he eats anything. He loves eating. The first time I gave him a drumstick, he'd put it in his mouth and he'd spit it out. He had no idea what to do, and he'd look at me like, aren't you going to help? He had no idea how to eat a drumstick. It was hilarious. But if you want to try, I say go for it. My recommendation might not be what you think, though. A lot of people are so accustomed to gradually switching dog foods. If you go from one brand to the next, your dog's stomach can get upset, when we're talking about kibble. And the reason that is because dogs' stomachs are not designed for kibble, so it takes them a while to adapt to a new brand. With raw, you don't need to do that. In fact, it may actually be a bad idea to switch slowly. Kibble digests very slowly because it's mostly fillers that your dog can't digest. Raw digests very quickly, so it goes through their system very fast. So if you're mixing the two, it's possible your dog gets an upset stomach from eating the two types of things that are going to digest at very different speeds and different rates. So if you decide to test it, just go for it. Literally from one day to the next. I know that sounds weird, but just do it. Your dog may struggle to eat the food at first if your dog is anything like mine. That's fine. If your dog doesn't eat, just take away the food and then offer it again at the next meal. Your dog's going to figure it out. He's not going to die. Clean those dishes, get quality food and protein, and you're going to be in good shape. So some people are going to want to supplement with sweet potatoes, rice, or other such foods. I say don't do it. Your dog doesn't need it. Don't worry about switching your proteins. You can feed chicken today, rabbit tomorrow, and fish the next day. That's the other thing that's cool is this, this type of feeding is so healthy for your dog. It's not like you've got to always be adjusting and, always be, okay, well, I'm going to gradually switch from rabbit to fish to beef or whatever. No, you can just do it from one day to the next. So I know I've thrown a ton of info at you today. Hopefully you've been able to glean enough where you can try this if you'd like. I encourage you to do additional research as well and learn as much as you can. Don't just take my word for it. And if you've got questions, comment on the video, send us emails, and we'd be happy to answer them as best we can. I wish you the best of luck. Happy feeding.